Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Rab Razzak. I'm a outpatient palliative medicine doctor at Sutter Health, and today's talk will be on resilience through life's challenges and changes. I don't have any financial disclosures, but I am faculty with Vital Talk and don't receive any proceeds. I have done some research on scramble therapy and unfortunately don't get any proceeds from them either. And some other disclosures is, I feel that our experiences and lived experiences sort of dictate some of our biases of sorts. So a bit about me, I was born in Bangladesh, grew up in North Jersey, so forget about it or don't forget about it. And did some advocacy work after finishing training. That's us at the White House at the Rose Garden event when Obama first started talking about healthcare reform. Me and Dr. Alice Chen. I'm also a coach. I've done a lot of the Tony Robbins curriculum and also am a certified life coach. I've done stand-up comedy on the side to keep me sane. And that's me at my first stand-up comedy event in Santa Monica on 3rd Street, and which was sold out. I'm an avid volleyball player. That's me still jumping up when I was younger before my injuries. And I'm a big Notre Dame fan. That's my family and I there at Notre Dame. And I'm a coaster. Again, grew up on the East Coast and now live in sunny California. Today's talk will talk about the various changes that occur to people who have cancer and undergo treatment for cancer, recognize the impact of mindfulness on different aspects of one's symptoms, recognize the impact of yoga on symptoms, and also we'll practice a few skills that I think can help you cope with having cancer. Merriam-Webster dictionary defines resilience as an ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. And this study actually looked at 39 articles and looked at a high resilience score that were associated with lower anxiety and depression and higher quality of life scores. Factors that were related to resilience include personal factors like age, and gender, and then disease factors such as stages, the treatments that they've gone through, and presence or absence of physical symptoms. And then there's also other internal factors about with self-efficacy and hopefulness, optimism, being able to cope well with their disease. And so, today's talk will go over ways to be able to do some of that. But I thought it would be helpful to really get a sense of some of these factors that can help with resilience. There's a meta-analysis reviewing 32 randomized control trial, reviewing 12 interventions, and saw that the relative effect sizes of attention and interpretation therapy, cyclic adjustment training, cognitive interventions, expressive therapies like music therapy and art therapies, positive psychological interventions, social support intervention, and work environment therapy had statistical significance in enhancing resilience. And again, I will go over some ways for us to, again, think about ways to help our attention and be able to cope with having a serious illness. And so it turns out, given that quality of life, less anxiety, less depression can be helpful with resilience. The data shows that palliative care, which is specialized medical care for people with serious illness, that's what I do. When people get palliative care, people not only live better, but they live longer too. And there have been multiple randomized control trials looking at palliative care in relationship to symptoms and quality of life. And this is one of them by Dr. Marie Bakaitis, looking at 322 patients within 8 to 12 weeks of new diagnosis of GI, lung, GU, and breast cancers, with a prognosis of approximately about a year. And here they did 4 nurse practitioner visits versus usual care. And this palliative care nursing education, in addition to the usual oncology care, what they showed was it allowed improved quality of life, fewer symptoms. So this ESAS here, with ESAS, we ask about pain and shortness of breath and nausea and constipation and fatigue and anxiety, depression, insomnia, those type of symptoms. And so they had fewer symptoms and they had less depression. And so that's why I recommend ask for palliative care, ask your oncologist or your primary care doc, wherever it is that you're seeing, to make sure you get palliative care involved. And palliative care can sometimes be a scarce resource. So figuring out what's in your community, so you can actually get the help that you need. And so I'd love to get a sense from you in terms of what are ways that you care for yourself. And there's, some of the common factors that when you ask people about ways that they care for themselves, and that can be helpful, is number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 is sleep, right? It's a conversation I'm having with my 15-year-old right now. And so sleep, making sure there's exercise and activity, healthy diet, social interaction and community, and mindfulness. And so if you think about areas in the world where people are living the longest, you're thinking about the blue zones, right? Some of the commonalities were it was largely a vegetarian diet, which is obviously a healthier diet, exercise and movement, and then also community and social connectedness. So, some of the major factors that help people live longer can also be helpful in terms of ways to just take care of yourself at baseline. And so we'll move on to meditation, right? So it's a group of practices for cultivating emotional well-being, relaxation, mindfulness, insight, wisdom, and compassion. And there was a meta-analysis that was done looking at 47 trials with about 3,500 participants. And that showed that mindfulness meditation programs had a moderate effect on anxiety. So there was improved anxiety from 8 weeks to 36 months, improved depression, 8 weeks to about 3 to 6 months, and pain for many weeks at a time. And then thinking about yoga, this was a study that looked at 200 patients who were post-treatment for breast cancers. And they looked at them over about a 12-week period where they got twice weekly yoga versus being on a wait list. That was the control group. And then they sort of followed them post-intervention, immediately post-intervention, and then at 3 months. And at 3 months follow-up, so that there was an average of 23% lower than the waitlist participants in terms of their cognitive decline. And so there were differences in cognitive complaints about psychological distress, fatigue, and sleep quality, both from right after the intervention as well as 3 months follow-up. And it turns out the higher that they practice this, the greater the effect in terms of the cognitive improvement. And so those who didn't do any practice, their control had a lot of cognitive issues. But those who practiced but not a lot, they actually had improved symptoms. And those who had higher practice, they had significantly more improved symptoms in terms of cognition. This study looked at 410 survivors with cancer who had moderate or greater sleep disturbances and sort of followed them for 2 to 24 months post surgery, chemotherapy, and or radiation therapy. And they got standard care versus standard care plus 4 weeks of yoga intervention. And these yoga interventions were about 2 75-minute sessions, which is a pretty good amount of time. And what they did is they did these breathing exercises, some gentle postures that were restorative, and meditation. And those who got the standard plus yoga sessions actually had greater improvements in the global sleep quality, subjective sleep quality, daytime dysfunction, and wake after sleep onset, as well as their sleep efficiency. And in terms of the sleep medications, there's also significant improvement in terms of the amount of medications that they use to be able to fall asleep. There's another trial that looked at 320 patients who had breast cancer surgery who were randomly assigned to 6 weeks mindfulness-based stress reduction or usual care. And they looked at psychological symptoms like depression, anxiety, stress, fear of recurrence, which is obviously a common symptom that people have. And then they looked at physical symptoms like fatigue, pain, sleep, and drowsiness, and then looked at cognitive symptoms and sort of assessed at baseline 6 weeks to 12 weeks and saw that the mindfulness-based stress reduction was effective in both the psychological symptom improvement with anxiety, depression, perceived stress, and quality of life, the emotional well-being, as well as fatigue. And with that was, they looked at the cluster of symptoms of fatigue, sleep, drowsiness. And so there was a significant improvement in both psychological as well as physical in terms of the fatigue symptoms improvement. And this was sustained between 6 and 12 weeks effects with the mindfulness. So there's one study that looked at healthcare providers and looking at things like burnout. And this is a study that was done at Duke with Dr. Brian Sexton, who's now the chief wellness officer there. And he talks about 3 good things. So before you go to bed, think about 3 good things that happened that day. So, and thinking about what went well today. What was your role in making that happen? And how did it make you feel? And the data on that he published saw that when these healthcare providers did this, they had lower burnout, lower depression, and less conflict, better work-life balance. And so this is actually something that I recommend to a lot of my patients and their families to be able to think about 3 good things. And when I think about this, I the coach in me sort of comes out. And so, one concept that I am an advocate of in terms of number one, being able to get a sense of where we are on a daily basis throughout the day. So for example, how often am I feeling something negative or feeling something positive? And that positivity could be love, it could be gratitude, it could be celebrating, it could be connecting with others. And then also, like, how often am I depressed? How often am I upset or angry or disappointed or sad, right? And the thing is, it's okay to feel those things. I think the issue is living in that space can be really hard and it can go into a spiral. And so one thing I recommend is number one, that recognition, oh, I'm in this state that's not the healthiest or that's in negative state. And so my response to that is, you know what, why don't you, it's okay to feel that. Why don't you feel that for a minute or two? And then think about something you're grateful for. Because physiologically, we can't feel both at the exact same time in terms of like love and fear, right? You can feel one and then go back and forth. And so when you find yourself in anxiety or in a negative emotion, after feeling it for a bit, come to gratitude. And so, I know we'll come. I'll show you a few exercises to do that I think could be really helpful. There's this other concept in positive psychology that talks about frequency of events versus magnitude. So a lot of times we'll look forward to like your 50th birthday, for example, right? That's going to be a big event. But what if and you do that, it's a really high high, and then it sort of comes down if you see on the right side here. It's a big event and it sort of comes down. And in the positive psychology field, they're talking about having more frequency of positive events, right? And being able to, what if you were to set things up in advance where you've got a phone call to look forward to, or like a really nice meal that you're looking forward to if you can taste and just have bites of it, right? Um, if you want to set up specific time to walk your dog or have spend quality time with the loved one, or also being able to do these gratitude exercises. Um, I think if you schedule it throughout the day, again, that's frequency versus the magnitude of something, a big event. Um, and so I think that's something that can be really important for you to be able to, again, live a better life and be able to cope better. But sometimes it requires some planning, right? And again, I don't want you always to be happy. I think it doesn't make a lot of sense because a lot of times what we can do is like, okay, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy. That's not really what I want you to do because what you're going to do is you're going to suppress the negative emotions, but they're still going to be there and they're going to stack on top of each other. And so I think being able to process this will be really helpful. So again, Dr. Brian Sexton talks about a gratitude letter, spending a few minutes writing a brief note to someone who did something amazing for you. And so in that letter, writing down what they did, how it impacted you, and what it says about them. And maybe spending several minutes to about 7 minutes doing this, and then reading it aloud or reading it to yourself. And what'll happen is you actually feel better. And if you're reading it to someone or have someone read that letter, let's say the person you wrote it to, it'll help them feel better. And if a random person was there and they read the letter, it'll actually make them feel better too. And so it's amazing how like we have a lot of these things, and it's not necessarily expensive, but it requires some thought and some intentionality to some of these practices. And so what I want to do is be able to go over some exercises that I do. And what I'll do is I'll actually stop sharing, but I'll actually talk to you about some of these exercises that I do. And if you can put in some of the things that you do right now that make a lot of sense for you. And I think it'd be a great way to share with the community that's here. Well, one exercise that I like doing is it's something that I've learned from the Heart Math Institute of heart breathing. So what I like to do is just put my hand on my heart and just start feeling, if I can, feel my heartbeat. And if you can't, that's okay. And then close my eyes and just take calm, comfortable breaths. So breathe in, breathe out, and breathe in, and breathe out. And just this simple practice of breathing, it actually helps center you. And so the reason that's helpful is so there's three things that really affect your state. And so one of them is your physiology, so how you're breathing. So this is why coming back to breath is really helpful because it affects your physiology. So again, hand on your heart. And so after a couple minutes of this, you'll get out of your head and you'll get into your heart. And we function so much better when we are in our hearts than in our heads, because our heads tell us some nonsense sometimes, right? And some things just don't make sense. But when we do this exercise, again, changes your physiology. And as you do this, you can also think about things you're grateful for. And so that's your focus. And so this triad of your physiology, so how you're standing or sitting, are you hunched over? Because a lot of times that'll restrict your respiratory status. Or, and even if you were to just put your hands on your hips and just stand like Wonder Woman or Superman, right? Just doing that for several minutes will actually affect your hormone levels, your stress hormones and other hormones, right? And so it'll reduce the cortisol. It'll also, and so that can actually be quite helpful. So we talked about our physiology, so how we're standing, how we're sitting, how we are breathing. And so keep in mind, like a lot of times if we're anxious with anxiety, sometimes or if people are panicking, right? Automatically their respiratory rate goes up, right? Your breathing may be 20 to 30 per minute, right? In terms of respiratory rate. And so what you can do is, again, put your hand on your heart. And you'll see automatically your respiratory rate calms down. Or you can actually do something called square breathing or box breathing, right? So what you can do is breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, and hold out for 4 seconds. So let's do this together. So breathe in, hold, breathe out, and then hold again. In, hold, exhale, and hold out again. And so if each side is 4 seconds, that's about 16 seconds there. So you automatically go from breathing 30 to about 4 per minute, right? So again, that's your physiology right there in action. So I actually had a patient who was having one of these panic attacks, and as I was entering the room, the resident actually spoke with her and said, "Oh yeah," asked the nurse to get Ativan intravenously in the hospital, and so I said, "Well, let me just work with this person," and it's someone who I knew, and just did the square breathing or box breathing thing, and within a minute she was back to normal. She didn't need that medication, and obviously these medications can be helpful. However, if you can get it controlled by yourself, how wonderful could that be? Right? And the other issue is quite often with things like cancer and other diseases, you have sometimes may not have control over how if it gets worse or if it gets better. There are obviously things you're doing if you're like seeking treatments or you're doing different things to help control the symptoms. However, these are outside things that are helping, right? With medications and which can be very helpful, chemotherapies. And at the same time, I think we also have some degree of internal forces, as we talked about earlier, to be able to help us be able to cope. And because we have no control over a lot of this outside stuff, if we can get some control, some degree of control over some of our internal factors, I think that could be quite helpful. And a lot of people actually feel better because it's something that they can do. And again, and the thing is, not everything works for everyone, right? And so it's a matter of finding what works for you. And so if you find square breathing helpful, great, right? And you can do that in your mind, or if you need to move your hands like this, you can do that too. Or this heart breathing can really be helpful for some people. And there was this one exercise that, remember, I went to this workshop and they were talking about mindfulness, and he didn't call it mindfulness. He called it something else. And when I thought about it, I was like, you know what, that's nonsense. And then he led us through this exercise, and it was really powerful. But we did it for like 20, 25 minutes. And as I did it, I sort of like I said, you know what, I'm here, may as well do it. And I did it, and I remember crying through it. And this is a moment in my time in my life, like about 10 years back, where I was at this institution where I didn't feel like I was enough. And and everyone is so smart. And I was like, okay, what am I going to contribute here? And so I would say yes to a lot of different things, regardless of whether it was something that I was interested in or not. And turns out that after I did some of this work, I as I did this exercise, I was like bawling, I was crying, but I felt so much lighter afterwards. And I was like, oh wow, I actually do feel better. I don't know why. And then that's when I started looking up uh, studies on mindfulness and such, and found the amount of data to be overwhelmingly positive. And again, it's a matter of finding what works for you. And so one thing I like to do is guide you through that 25-minute exercise, but I want to do it in like 3 to 4 minutes. And so if you can play along with me, I'd love that. And so again, what I'd like for you to do is sit down and put your hand on your heart. So please take a seat, hand on your heart. Take some calm, comfortable breaths. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. As you do this, I want you to visualize things you are grateful for. Just visualize it like you're experiencing it right now, and give thanks. It can be a person, or an experience. Brighten the picture in your mind, or raise the volume of that experience and see if that intensifies the emotion. Calm, all throughout the exercise, just calm, comfortable breaths. Next, I want you to just imagine a light between our eyebrows and just focus on that light. And that light could be light, it could be energy, it could be the divine, whatever you want it to be. And imagine that light entering your body, healing the things that need to be healed. Healing any pain or anxiety, any frustrations or disappointments, any sadness. Healing any uncertainty you may have, just washing over you, like this light, like a wave of light. And that same light sending out energy all throughout your body, strengthening the best parts of you. Strengthening your mind, your heart, your love, your compassion, your hope, your resilience through this experience, strengthening. And finally, one by one, once you visualize, three things you're going to create or accomplish. And it could be as simple as, you know what, I'll bring a smile to someone's face. And visualize it happening the way you want it to happen, just like athletes do before they go onto a court or a track or a field. Visualize it happening and celebrate each one like it's happening for you at this moment. And celebrate it with a smile through each one. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. How did that feel? Feel free to put that into the comment section. And I'd love to hear more about what are things that you do. Are there any mindfulness practices that you do that you find very helpful? Or are there any specific apps that you find very helpful? I'm not embedded into any. There is like things like Calm and Buddhify and some other things like that. There's this one app that I've used called Breathing Room, and they have like several free videos there that I've found quite helpful. And so I use some of those, and I think one of them is I think the abundant light practice. There's like another 3-minute exercise. There's another exercise that's called Soul Sync, and that's I think like 15 minutes, and it's kind of weird. There's these sounds that you would make, like or so, that when I'm in this mode in this mindfulness kick, I actually use that quite often on a daily basis. And so again, find what works for you and program it. So like I talked about earlier in terms of frequency over magnitude, whatever works, what if you were to think of it as your medicine? What if you took this medicine twice a day, like in the morning after you woke up, and then at night before you went to bed? And see how you feel with that. And if it feels good, great. And then you can also add it as needed. like a PRN medication and an as needed medication. And this could be part of your therapy. This could be part of your medical regimen, right? And again, find what works for you and just explore to see what else works for you, right? If there's three good things, if you did that exercise before you went to bed, that's helpful, great. And you'll see, like, after you do this on a daily basis, and then you see where you are from week to week in terms of how you're feeling, chances are you'll probably be happier, right? Because you're actually thinking about things that are positive. And so, again, find what works for you and be able to use that to be able to leverage feeling better and coping. And there's also this idea of doing things like dignity therapy and finding ways to be able to like do legacy work, to share your experiences, and some of that could be great to be able to connect with your loved ones right now, and and if you get a lot sicker down the road, it can be quite powerful for them. But be able to answer questions about things that you did as a kid, or if you became a parent, or if when you were first in love, or whatever that experience was, or even if a tough time that you had that you've overcome, like what are some things you've learned from it that you can actually pass on to a nephew, niece, or relatives or friends, and and that way you can actually contribute also to some extent, because also a lot of times one thing I hear from a lot of my patients is, I used to do this, this, and that, and now I'm not doing much. I'm feeling so bad. I'm too weak. And so again, finding the things that work for you. So for example, another thing, there's so many symptoms that you can actually develop while you're getting treatments, right? Pain, from your disease, as well as treatment. So pain, neuropathy, fatigue, nausea, vomiting. There's a lot of different things we can do for it. In terms of fatigue, one of the best treatments for fatigue is exercise. And when I say exercise, I'm not saying pump, like doing bench presses all day. Some of that is doing incremental exercise. Like, what if you were to walk for 3 minutes? Can you do that? And what if you did that every day? And where you just walked for 3 minutes. And then next week, why don't you add a couple more minutes to that? Yeah, every day. And the week after that, what if you added another couple minutes? And then after that, what if you added another 3 minutes, right? And you'll see after about a month, you're actually doing like 10 to 20 minutes of walking when you started at 5. Right? So adding this incremental exercise can really be helpful for things like fatigue. And so there's so many things that folks can help with. And you don't need to do this alone. There's a lot of people that can be there to help you through. If you're someone who's really spiritual, you don't necessarily have to be religious, even if you're someone who's spiritual, or just someone you want to be able to talk to someone. Sometimes a chaplain can be quite helpful to be able to just talk to you about life and meaning and such. They don't necessarily have to talk about God. Or what if you're someone who enjoys music? What if you were to play some music that's really profound, that's affected you, or a song from your high school prom, or your wedding, or a song that you played when your kid was born, or your nephew was born, or what have you, from a special moment in your life. What if you were to play some of that? How would you feel? Or if you want to like play some dance music and just dance, right? Uh, make time for things that you enjoy, because you're more than your disease. And what we need to do is see you as a whole person and human being, and let's find the resources for you to get you through. And you're not alone. Use your resources. And my contact email is there. So if you do need to reach out, feel free to message me. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Or if there's additional resources that could be helpful, happy to share that too. So thank you so much. And I so appreciate your time. Thank you.